You know what's strange? Some people don't just dislike crowds, they actively avoid them. Not out of arrogance, not even out of fear, but something deeper, quieter, almost invisible. And the more you watch them, the more you realize they might be seeing something the rest of us are missing. We usually assume people who avoid crowds are shy, antisocial, or anxious. It's an easy label. After all, in a world that celebrates extroversion, being alone feels like a flaw. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if avoiding crowds isn't a weakness but a psychological adaptation? Picture this. You're standing in a packed room, voices overlap, bodies move unpredictably, music hums in the background. For most people, this is energy. But for some, it feels like noise not just around them, but inside their head. Every conversation, every movement, every expression becomes something to process. Now imagine walking out of that room. The silence, the space, the relief. For someone who avoids crowds, that moment doesn't feel like escape. It feels like clarity. Think about it. The human brain is constantly filtering information, but not all brains filter the same way. Some people have what psychologists call higher sensory processing sensitivity. Their minds don't just notice more, they process more. Subtle facial expressions, tone shifts, background movements, everything gets amplified. And this is where things get interesting. Avoiding crowds isn't always about social anxiety. In fact, many people who avoid crowds are perfectly capable of socializing, just not in chaotic environments. Their discomfort isn't about people. It's about overstimulation. Research in environmental psychology suggests that crowded spaces increase cognitive load. The brain has to work harder to make sense of everything. For highly sensitive individuals, this load becomes exhausting very quickly. What feels like a lively atmosphere to one person can feel like mental overload to another. But here's what most people don't realize. There's also a deeper, emotional layer. Crowds reduce individuality. In large groups, people tend to conform, act impulsively, and lose a sense of personal awareness. This is known as de-individuation, a concept studied in social psychology for decades. Think about riots, viral trends, or even how people behave differently in packed concerts compared to small gatherings. For someone who values introspection and awareness, this loss of individuality can feel unsettling. It's not just noise they're avoiding, it's disconnection. And this is where things get strange. Historically, solitude wasn't always seen as a problem. Philosophers, writers, and thinkers often sought isolation to understand themselves better. In contrast, modern society equates constant social interaction with happiness and success. Social media amplifies this idea, making it seem like being surrounded by people is the default state of a fulfilled life. But is it? Studies on well-being show that meaningful interactions matter more than frequent ones. Quality over quantity, depth over noise. People who avoid crowds often prioritize deeper, one-on-one connections. They're not withdrawing from people. They're choosing how they engage. Imagine this: two people at a party. One moves from group to group, laughing, talking, constantly stimulated. The other stays on the edge, observing, maybe speaking to one person for a long time. From the outside, one looks socially successful, the other reserved. But internally, the second person might be experiencing something richer, more focused, more intentional, more real. Here's the deeper insight. Avoiding crowds is often about control. Not control over others, but over one's own mental state. In crowded environments, control fades. There's unpredictability, noise, pressure to respond. For certain personalities, especially those who are introspective or sensitive, this lack of control creates discomfort. So they step away, not because they can't handle people, but because they understand themselves. And maybe that's the part we misunderstand the most. We live in a world that constantly pushes us outward: more connection, more interaction, more noise. But some people move in the opposite direction. They protect their attention. They choose their environments. They seek clarity over chaos. So the next time you see someone avoiding a crowd, don't assume they're missing out. They might just be experiencing the world in a way that's quieter, but far more intentional. And maybe the real question isn't why they avoid crowds. Maybe it's why the rest of us need them so much. If this made you see people a little differently, you might want to stick around, because there's a lot more psychology we rarely talk about.